It was an ordinary evening, yet there was an unmistakable tension in the air. Shahjahan and Manahill sat across from each other at a dimly lit table in a cozy, upscale restaurant. The soft clink of silverware and low murmur of conversations filled the background, but it was as if time had slowed down for the two of them. They smiled politely, as they always did, but there was a certain coldness that had crept between them, a quiet distance neither was willing to address. Manahill, with her radiant smile and effortless charm, spoke animatedly about her day, recounting the usual work gossip and the latest happenings in her life. Her words were light, almost carefree, as though everything in their world was perfectly in place. But Shahjahan couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. As she spoke, her phone buzzed softly on the table, a message lighting up the screen. She glanced at it quickly, almost too quickly, but continued talking as if nothing had happened. Shahjahan watched her, his gaze steady, but his mind racing. There was something unfamiliar in her demeanor, a subtle shift, a hesitation he couldn't quite place. It was the way her eyes darted for just a second, the faintest smile that didn't reach her eyes, the way she seemed to laugh a little too easily. Then she mentioned him, Mark, casually, as if he were no more than a passing acquaintance. "He's just a friend," she said with a shrug. "We've been talking a lot lately." Shahjahan's heart sank. He had heard that name before, too many times. But this time, something about the way she said it felt different. Something in her voice gave away more than she intended. A knot formed in Shahjahan's stomach. He took a deep breath and asked, his tone calm but controlled, "Just a friend? Or something more?" Shahjahan's mind drifted back, pulled unwillingly into the past, to the days when everything had seemed simpler, the years before Manahill had started to change, before he could feel the distance growing between them. Back then, they were inseparable, two halves of a whole. Shahjahan remembered the first time he met Mark, a charming, confident man who had been a part of Manahill's life long before he had come into the picture. At first, Shahjahan didn't think much of it. Mark was an old friend, someone who had been there through the highs and lows of Manahill's life. He'd heard stories of their adventures, their shared memories, and how close they had once been. In the early days of their relationship, Shahjahan never felt threatened by the past. After all, he was Manahill's present, the one who held her heart now. But as time went on, small doubts began to creep in. Manahill would mention Mark in passing, always with a wistful tone, a lingering smile as she spoke of their shared history. Shahjahan noticed that whenever Mark's name was mentioned, Manahill's eyes would soften in a way he couldn't ignore. There was a connection there that didn't fade, no matter how many years had passed since their breakup. She spoke about him with such tenderness, a kind of familiarity that made Shahjahan wonder if there was still a part of her that hadn't truly let go. Manahill had insisted that their breakup was mutual, that they had simply grown apart. She told Shahjahan how much she had loved Mark, but how their relationship had run its course. It was easy for Shahjahan to believe her at first. He trusted her, after all, and he didn't want to question the past. But there was a nagging feeling that lingered. Whenever Manahill would mention Mark, a veil of sadness would pass over her, like a fleeting shadow that she quickly tried to hide. One night, as they lay in bed, Shahjahan had asked her, half joking, half serious, if she still thought about Mark. She had laughed softly, brushing the question off as absurd. "He's part of my past," she had said, her voice steady. But Shahjahan noticed the way her fingers had traced the edge of the sheet, the way her gaze had momentarily turned distant. "Just a friend," that's what she had said. But her words had always seemed too rehearsed, as if she were trying to convince herself more than anyone else. Shahjahan had convinced himself that it didn't matter. He was her future, and that was all that mattered. He held her close, kissed her, and let the moment drift away. But as time went on, the unease lingered. Mark wasn't just a friend. Shahjahan knew that. He didn't need to be told. He could see it in the way Manahill would light up whenever they spoke of him, the way her eyes would soften when they shared a memory from the past. It was a connection that Shahjahan could never have, no matter how hard he tried. Manahill had promised Shahjahan that she had moved on. She assured him that Mark was nothing more than a distant memory. Yet Shahjahan couldn't shake the feeling that she had never truly closed that chapter. He wondered if she ever would. As the days passed after their dinner, Shahjahan couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his chest. It wasn't just the way Manahill had mentioned Mark so casually at dinner, as if their past was something so easily dismissed. It was the way she acted when his name came up, the way she smiled a little too brightly, the soft inflection in her voice that betrayed a connection deeper than just friendship. Shahjahan had always known that Mark had been someone significant in her life, but the words, just a friend, now felt like a lie hanging between them. Shahjahan began to notice the small things. Manahill's sudden need to check her phone whenever she was around him, her smile fading when she read certain messages. She was becoming more distant, almost as though she were hiding something. She didn't seem bothered by it, but Shahjahan's mind raced with possibilities. Could she still be emotionally involved with Mark? Was this friendship of hers something more? One evening, as they sat together in their living room, Manahill was scrolling through her phone. Shahjahan tried to focus on the show they were watching, but his mind kept drifting back to the conversation they had had. The words, just a friend, echoed in his ears like a distant warning bell. He stole a glance at her phone, trying to catch a glimpse of the name that was lighting up her screen. It wasn't Mark's name that appeared, but Shahjahan's curiosity had been piqued. He knew then that something wasn't right. He had never felt this paranoid before, but it seemed like everything was pushing him towards that conclusion. Later that night, as they went to bed, Shahjahan turned to her. The words came out before he could stop them, an eruption of the doubt that had been quietly simmering inside him. "Manahill, how often do you really talk to Mark?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, something he couldn't hide. Manahill paused, caught off guard by the question. She glanced at him, her face momentarily flickering with something he couldn't place. She turned her back to him, pulling the blanket closer around her. "Shahjahan, please, not tonight." But it wasn't just tonight. It wasn't just one conversation or one comment about Mark. Shahjahan had felt this growing distance for weeks, maybe months. Every time he tried to talk to her about it, she shut him down, brushing him off with an easy smile and a "don't worry" that never seemed to reassure him. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that nothing was going on. But the more she dismissed his concerns, the more the gnawing doubt inside him grew. The next day, Manahill mentioned Mark again, lightly, almost nonchalantly, while they were having breakfast. She spoke about a plan to meet up with him in a group setting. Nothing intimate, just catching up as old friends. But something in her voice had changed. There was a subtle excitement there, an eagerness to see him that made Shahjahan uncomfortable. The knot in his stomach tightened as he listened to her speak. It wasn't the first time she had mentioned Mark in such a way, but it was the first time he had felt like an outsider in his own marriage. "I don't think it's a good idea," Shahjahan said, his voice quiet but firm. He couldn't hold back anymore. "I don't trust it, Manahill. I don't trust him." Manahill looked at him, surprised by the sharpness in his tone. She put down her coffee mug, her gaze narrowing slightly. "Shahjahan, you're being paranoid. We're just friends. It's not like that." "I don't believe you," he snapped, his voice rising before he could stop it. He didn't want to sound angry, but the frustration had been building for too long. "You keep saying just a friend, but it doesn't feel that way. You're not being honest with me. I can feel it." Manahill recoiled, hurt flashing in her eyes. "I am being honest. Why can't you trust me?" Shahjahan felt the sting of her words, but the anger bubbling inside him was stronger. He had trusted her. He had always trusted her. But now, every word she spoke seemed to further push him away from the woman he had once believed he knew so well. "Because every time Mark's name comes up, I see something in your eyes. Something you're not telling me. Something I can't ignore." The room was heavy with silence. Manahill was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing her response. She finally sighed, a long, weary exhale. "Shahjahan, you have to trust me. This is what you think it is. Mark is a part of my past. I swear it's over. It has been for years." But Shahjahan couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The past was still there, lurking in the shadows of their relationship, and no matter how many times she reassured him, the doubt remained. It had taken root deep inside him, and he couldn't uproot it. The conversation ended, but the tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Shahjahan didn't know what to believe anymore. Was Manahil really being truthful, or was there something more she was hiding? Something she wasn't ready to face? The more he thought about it, the more his mind spun with possibilities. And as much as he wanted to trust her, something inside him whispered that this was just the beginning of a much darker truth. The days after the breakfast confrontation were like walking through a fog for Shahjahan. He had pushed the issue with Manahil, but the distance between them only seemed to widen. She was distant, no longer the warm, affectionate woman he had fallen in love with when they were together. It felt like they were on opposite ends of a chasm, her eyes avoiding his, her responses shallow and distracted. Shahjahan's suspicions grew stronger with each passing day, and the tension was becoming unbearable. His thoughts constantly circled back to Mark. Manahil had tried to reassure him that their relationship was nothing more than friendly, but something inside Shahjahan refused to believe it. The glances she shared when Mark's name was mentioned, the unspoken excitement she couldn't hide when she talked about him, it all painted a picture Shahjahan wasn't ready to accept. But deep down, he knew he couldn't keep ignoring it. That evening, as they sat in the living room in near silence, Shahjahan felt an overwhelming need to confront the truth. His mind raced with the possibility that Manahil had been hiding something from him all along, and he wasn't sure if he could keep pretending everything was fine. His heart beat faster as he watched her, his pulse quickening with both fear and anger. He needed answers, and he couldn't stand the uncertainty any longer. He took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he set down the book he had been absent-mindedly flipping through. "Manahil, we need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. She looked up from her phone, her face soft but guarded. "Shahjahan, please. Not again." "I can't keep doing this," Shahjahan continued, trying to keep his voice steady despite the emotions that were threatening to break free. "I can't keep pretending like everything is fine when I feel like you're hiding something from me. I know it's about Mark. I can feel it." Manahil's expression shifted, her features hardening slightly. She opened her mouth to speak, but Shahjahan cut her off before she could say anything. "You say he's just a friend, but it doesn't feel like that. Not when I see the way you look at him, when I hear the way you talk about him. You're not being honest with me, Manahil. I can see it, and I can't ignore it anymore." Manahil's face twisted with frustration, her eyes narrowing in defense. "I am being honest with you. Mark and I are just friends. Why can't you trust me? Why can't you just believe me?" Shahjahan stood up, unable to sit still any longer. His emotions boiled over, his frustration erupting in a torrent of words he had been holding back for weeks. "Because every time you mention him, every time you talk about him with that look in your eyes, I feel like I'm losing you. I don't know if you even see it, but I can feel it. Manahil, you're holding on to something that's not me, and I don't know if I can keep living like this." Manahil's face faltered for a moment, her lips trembling as the truth of his words hit her. She had been so caught up in the comfort of her past, in the familiarity of a relationship with Mark that had once been her everything, that she hadn't realized how much it was affecting Shahjahan. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding back. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Manahil whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't even know I was doing it. Mark, he's just someone I've known for so long. But you're right. I never really let go of him. I didn't want to. I thought I could just push those feelings away and pretend they didn't matter anymore. But they still do, Shahjahan. And I've been lying to you and to myself about it." Shahjahan's heart sank as he saw the tears in her eyes. Her confession was like a knife twisting in his chest. He had been right all along, and yet hearing it from her lips felt worse than he had imagined. It wasn't just a fear of losing her. It was the realization that their marriage had been built on half-truths and unspoken doubts. Manahil continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for you to feel this way. I've been so focused on trying to bury my past with him that I didn't see how much it was hurting us. I'm sorry, Shahjahan. I never wanted to lose you." Shahjahan stood there, his mind spinning, unable to find the words to express the pain he felt. The silence between them was suffocating. The weight of the truth hung in the air like a heavy fog, and Shahjahan realized that the man he had been, confident, trusting, secure, was no longer the person he was today. The woman he had loved, the one he had built his future with, was no longer who he thought she was, and the realization crushed him in a way he had never experienced before. "I don't know if I can get past this," he finally managed to say, his voice hoarse. "I don't know if I can trust you again." The words hung in the air between them, cutting deeper than anything he had said before. The dam had broken, and Shahjahan wasn't sure if there was any way to rebuild it. Manahil, her face streaked with tears, didn't know what to say. She had wanted to tell him the truth for so long, but now that the walls had come down, she feared it was too late. Shahjahan turned away, his heart heavy with the weight of her confession. The future they had once imagined together now seemed uncertain, clouded by the painful reality of the present. As he left the room, he didn't know where to go from here, but he knew that the path ahead would be anything but easy. The night after their argument, the house felt like a shell of its former self. The warmth that had once filled the rooms was now replaced with an oppressive silence, thick with the weight of unspoken words. Shahjahan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above him, but his thoughts refused to settle. He felt like a stranger in his own home, surrounded by memories that now seemed hollow, like fragments of a life that no longer belonged to him. Manahil, on the other hand, sat in the living room, her eyes red from crying, her hands trembling as she absently folded and unfolded the tissue. She had expected the confrontation to come at some point, but she never imagined it would break them apart so completely. She had wanted to be honest with Shahjahan, but the truth had been harder to face than she'd anticipated. Now, in the cold silence that followed, she realized just how much she had hurt him, how much she had taken their relationship for granted. The guilt weighed heavily on her chest, a constant pressure that left her breathless. She had never meant for things to spiral this way, but in trying to hold on to the past with Mark, she had unknowingly pushed Shahjahan away. What she had failed to see was that Shahjahan had been patient, quietly bearing the weight of his own doubts while she had buried her feelings, convincing herself that they no longer mattered. Shahjahan had always been the one who held their world together, the anchor in her life. But now, it felt as though everything was slipping through her fingers, and she wasn't sure how to fix it. The next morning, Shahjahan didn't speak much. He moved through the motions, getting dressed, grabbing his things for work, but there was no warmth in his movements. Manahil tried to catch his eye, but he avoided her gaze. Every time she spoke, he answered in short, clipped sentences, the familiar affection in his voice now gone. He was closed off, distant, and the gap between them felt impossibly wide. Before he left for work, he stood in the doorway, his hand on the handle. He didn't turn to look at her. "I need some time, Manahil," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "I don't know what to say right now. I don't know where we go from here." Manahil nodded, tears threatening to spill, but she didn't say anything. She knew that the damage had been done. She had no right to ask for his forgiveness. She could only hope that, somehow, time would allow them to rebuild the trust she had shattered. As Shahjahan closed the door behind him, Manahil stood in the empty space, her heart heavy with regret. She knew their future was uncertain, but she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She just didn't know if it was too late to fix what they had broken. Days turned into weeks, but the silence between Shahjahan and Manahil remained unbroken. The cracks in their relationship, once invisible, were now painfully obvious. Every word between them felt measured, every glance a reminder of what had been lost. Their once easy conversations had become strained, and the affection they had once shared now felt like a distant memory. Shahjahan threw himself into work, his focus sharper than ever, though his mind was never far from the woman he had once loved so deeply. He couldn't help but wonder if things would ever return to what they had been, or if the damage was too deep. He missed the warmth of her laughter, the way she used to look at him with love in her eyes, but all seemed so far away now. Manahil, meanwhile, was left to pick up the pieces of her own shattered heart. She had hoped that time would heal the wounds she had caused, but every moment without him felt like a cruel reminder of her mistakes. She had known deep down that she hadn't been fully honest with him about Mark, but she never imagined it would come to this. She had underestimated how much her actions had hurt him. Now, all she could do was wait, hoping that one day he would find a way to forgive her. But as the days passed, it became clear that neither of them knew what the future held. The love they had once shared seemed distant, like a fading photograph, and the uncertainty of what came next loomed over them both. Neither could be sure whether they could rebuild what had been broken, or if it was even worth trying. In the end, all they had were questions. Questions about forgiveness, trust, and whether love could survive the way of the past.